ahead and get started. This is Michelle Savage with XBRL US, and you are here for our webinar on understanding the new FERC taxonomy. Our speaker today is Campbell Pride. Campbell is our president and CEO. And just to go through a few logistical points, as we go through the session today, we will be doing a couple of poll questions, actually 4 poll questions for those of you who are interested in getting CPE credit. If you signed up for CPE, please make sure that you respond to the polls when they come up by clicking on the little radio buttons. And even if you have not signed on for CPE, if you go ahead and respond to the poll questions, we can make sure that you get that certificate later on, even if you didn't actually sign on for it. And as we go through the session today, we are taking questions, as we always do. And so please post your questions by clicking on the Q&A link that you see on the little console, and just key your question in there, and we'll take those as we get the questions that come through. Also, one last thing, if anybody is having any problems getting access, please send us an email to support@xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Campbell Pride, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the FERC taxonomy as we start in our first full year of compliance. Campbell.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So first, we're going to talk about some of the dates for filing these forms, and they're pretty much upon us at this point. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So just to go through this, and we confirm these haven't changed with the FERC before this call, and just so everyone knows what they are. So really, we're probably interested in really the annual filings. These are due by April 19th for the Form 6 filing. So that's coming up pretty soon. So just want to make sure everyone aware that is the date that they expect it to be filed by. The Form 2, that for the annual filing is expected also the day earlier on April 18th. The Form 1 on the same date, April 18th. For the Form 60, there's a little bit more time, which is May. And for the Form 714, it's June 1st. So for the Form 1, the Form 2, and the Form 6, these are pretty imminent. So we'll probably focus on those today if you have any questions on those, but we certainly can field questions on some of the other forms. So at this point, these forms are expected on these dates. The FERC is still having, there's a couple of issues with the rendering, but I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on this. Really, the rendering is provided as a way to really check that your filings are correct. It's not the authoritative filing on record. It's just basically being, the rendering allows it to be generated and people to review it. So if you see a problem in the rendering, which is a rendering issue, and this could be, and in particular, we've seen a few issues in the last week, which is things like it should be rendering in the HTML, but the HTML is not rendering properly. Just to be aware that that if you see that issue, it's annoying that it's not fixed, but all of the issues I think they've kind of got in the queue, and they're trying to address them ASAP. So I think they're going to try, there's a couple of issues left, and they're going to try and do a new drop of the rendering templates tonight. So to try and fix those issues so people feel better about it, and then they can be absolutely sure that they're okay. So if we go to the next slide, please, Michelle.
And one thing I wanted to mention, Campbell, is my apologies, but the April 19th date there should have been April 18th for the Form 6. That's a typo, so apologies.
Oh, okay. So that's 18th. No, don't think 19. Yes. We've anchored everyone on the 19th.
Yeah, so don't delay. Get ready right away. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll fix that on the slides that we post online.
Then obviously the quarterly filing dates are here as well, and we'll make these slides available after this. But if you've got these quarterly filings, there are, you've got a bit more time for those. For the 6Q, they're a bit later, but for the Qs for the majors, for the Form 2, May 31st, August 29th, and November 29th. Just so you know on those, so the 20022 taxonomy has been published. The tentative plan, it looks like, is that taxonomy then would be continued, would not be changed, and would be continued to use for the next 3 quarters, and then would be available to would be available to be used until the next annual filing next year. So if everyone's aware of that, that's the plan that they currently have. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. So once again, just to repeat that if you want to see changes to the FERC taxonomy, they're probably going to, as they work on the next release of the taxonomy, they're going to be doing any updates will be in the YETI system that's operated by FERC. So if you have issues associated with that, or you have questions, you can go into YETI and you can submit comments. So these are the current 2022 taxonomies that are available. So we expect that these taxonomies will be used for the remainder of 2022 for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. Then the fourth quarter would roll over to the 2023 taxonomy, and that should address a number of issues that have unable to be addressed. And one of the things they're trying to do there is to keep that taxonomy as stable as possible, to make it continue to go as long as possible. Okay, so if we get the next slide.
Kim, we also have a question. I don't know if you want to just jump in with questions right away or wait a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what's the question?
Sure. The question is, are there plans in the future to fix the PDF format of the generated Form 6 and 6Q? Page 114 on the income statement used to be all on one page. Now it is split between two pages.
Yeah, we can talk about this now. So with the original intention for FERC was to use this as a data collection platform. And one of the things they tried to do is to get away from PDF forms. The point of the rendering these, they're rendered as HTML, so it was possible for people to review their filings and make sure that they are correct. When those files go into eLibrary, which is basically the data distribution for these systems, they go in PDF. PDF is not supposed to be the official version of the filing. And we have asked FERC about this, do they intend to correct them? At the moment, they do not intend to change them. What this would entail for them is to basically do a better job of the conversions of the data. They currently have no plans to do that. If you think that would be a good idea for them to do that, that would be a matter of contacting the FERC and saying, hey, you should, look at generating these PDF forms in a format where it's not cutting off. And the reason it does, the rationale behind that is that the renders were originally created to be viewed on a browser and were not written to support output to like a traditional printed page format. So that would have to be something that would need to be added. And that was in the original requirements. They didn't think that was necessary. I think if people want to see what it used to look like, then obviously that's a matter of preference. So that's where it currently is. There are no plans to do that, other than just to do a very crude conversion of the HTML to PDF.
Okay, thanks. We have one more question. Maybe we just take this one quickly before I let you move on. If a filer needs to refile any previously submitted filing, will they use the latest taxonomy or the taxonomy that was used for the original filing?
At the moment, they only support the 2021 and the 2022 taxonomy. So if this is not an issue today. If you wanted, and what we've seen is, or what the FERC has told us, is that if you wanted to file a third quarter, let's say, that you didn't file, or a second half for 2020, any date prior, you can use the 2021 taxonomy to file those. So that would be, for the current situation now. Going forward, they will only support certain taxonomies. So it's really dependent on the taxonomies that are supported at that time. You only have a choice. So in theory, they shouldn't be changing that much. So you should be able to use the current version of the taxonomy. There was something we're going to talk about in a minute, which was the waiver and the exemptions that they added to some of the forms, which means that there are certain, it gives you a way to not report schedules if you don't need to. if a new schedule is added, let's say in the next year, and you want to go back and do a filing, there is a mechanism not to provide that additional data.
Thanks, Campbell. That's it on the questions right now.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, just some latest update. There were a couple of issues that come up, and some of you on the call may be aware of these. One is there was an incorrect element on item 12 of Schedule 108. There was an update made to the taxonomy because this item was incorrect, but that was put on a proposed taxonomy, but the rendering didn't reflect the 20022 taxonomy. So item 12 on Schedule 108, if you put it in the instance, it won't come up in the rendering. Just to be aware of that. This is for Form 1. If you don't see it, but you know it's in the instance, then you can ignore that fact. And that they're putting an updated version of the rendering out tonight, which will then basically address this issue. The next item was there was a problem. There was a change made to validations to add a rule for Schedule 103 on Form 6. And this was causing an error. So this is going to be fixed tonight as well. So if you're getting an error that you can't file for Form 6 for Schedule 103, this will be done tonight. So then you should be able to file tomorrow. I don't think it affects all filers. It only affects a handful of filers, but if this does have this issue come up, then they're going to do that tonight. These are like critical issues that they wanted to address. They were hoping that they didn't have any other issues, but they do. So these were going to address these two problems. Okay. There may be other reasons that filing is not rendering as expected. There's a couple of reasons for this. Either one, the data is not entered incorrect. This data is entered incorrectly and it's not showing up because it has it's been tagged incorrectly. Or B, there's a problem with the way the file is being rendered. I think at this point, all of these issues have been resolved, but just how do you determine which one of these is it? And how can you know for sure? So I just wanted to go through some of the scenarios that we're seeing. Next slide. So the first issue, there's a few of these has come up if the ordering of line items is incorrect. And this is usually an issue with the way the order number is tagged. So on a number of these schedules across all of these, you can order the way that the line items appear, and that's using an order number. Some cases, it appears that those order numbers are being ignored. And the reason for that is the order numbers, generally we expect to see them just have one dimension associated with them. In some cases, people are not tagging these order numbers correctly. So if you're having this issue where they're incorrect, chances are that you put the wrong dimension on it. That seems to be the main problem. And if you want to check what is the right members to put it on, you can go and look at the sample instances and they show you which is the right dimension to put on it. Make sure that the order numbers are defined. Some people expect the order just to come out, but they haven't defined the order numbers, so you've got to make sure you've done that. And we believe that all the rendering code issues related to ordering have been addressed at this point. So if it's not working, go and look at the sample instance. And if it's still not, if you think you've done it completely correctly, then feel free to send an email to FERC, or you can send it to us at XBRWS, or you can enter an issue in Yeti as well. Probably best to enter it in Yeti. They're constantly monitoring those at the moment just to make sure that there's no issues coming up. But you probably want to make sure and just go and exhaust those other methods first rather than, so that you can maybe be able to fix that issue yourself. Okay, so we have the next slide. I think we're backwards, Michelle. Next slide. Sometimes we've seen some cases where people have complained to us and said, I've entered the data, but it's not appearing in the schedule. Okay, once again on this, just really check that the data is the correct dimension members. Another thing is just to check that you've got it for the correct period. You've got a lot of flexibility in how you provide the data in XBRL. In some cases, we see filers just putting the data in for the wrong period. So you just need to make sure you've got double check that and make sure that that's correct. If you're not sure, the sample instances kind of show you where that should be. This is not such a problem on the annual filings because it's all for a year. On some of the quarterly filings, like the third quarter, this was a little bit more complicated because there are a number of different periods that it could have. But if you want to, if you've got data that's missing in the rows or the value's not there, then these are the things to look at. Just check those dimensions against the sample instance. The other thing that can cause problems is if you've duplicated facts in the instance, if you've entered the fact multiple times, and generally this won't cause an issue, but it does confuse things on which is the correct fact to take, especially if they have different values. The validation rules will pick this up, but if you try and do the rendering and you have duplicate fact issues in the filing, that can cause problems with the rendering. So one of the things if you're going to do, if you're going to render this, make sure that any of the duplicate fact value errors have been eliminated. Or if you've got multiple facts which represent the same thing and they have different values, generally the rendering is just going to randomly pick one, but that also could cause issues. So just to reiterate this, run the validation, make sure you don't have any errors, because if you've got errors in your filing and you try and do the rendering, that could cause some issue. Generally, we've tried to fix all those so it won't, but it's still a probability. So the other issue is, what if the schedule is not rendering at all, or is cut off, or sections are missing? We've seen a couple of cases with this, and I think we've addressed the issues for these. So please notify the FERC through Yeti or directly through support about one of these issues, especially if it's coming up blank, because this may be a more problematic error. We've seen lots of filings at this point, and we haven't really seen this anymore, but if you do see it, we had one the other day. There was a problem in the allowances schedule, and that's been resolved. But if you see this, if the rendering's incorrect, you can still file your filing if there's no validation errors. And this would be something like the row numbers start at like row 35 and all the other rows are missing. So if you see this, let the FERC know, but this should not stop you from going ahead and doing the filing. But if you do see in the situation, please let the FERC know through Yeti so that they can address those issues. So there's been some updates to the validation rules. There were some of these validation rules have been, particularly one around directors. I think this was for Form 6. It was giving you an error for this. So this rule was being amended, but if they haven't, this change is not working for you, just general guidance. If you've done the past, we've asked people just put NA for one of the rows, and then it's not going to come up for that director's schedule. So you should be able to do that. I think it's a warning, but if you get in that situation where it's requiring a value and there is no value applicable, and there are a number of Form 6 companies that don't have directors, then you can just use NA as an option to get around that. And just so you know, put a comment in Yeti, and then those validation rules are relatively quick to update. So once again, submit any Yeti comments and any validation issues that may be coming up. And there are a number of issues that have come up, and generally they should all be addressed. But if you do see something, please let us know, and especially if it's preventing someone from filing, that becomes an urgent matter. Okay, just talk about waivers and exemptions. There are some cases where for the Form 2 and the Form 2A and the Form 6 that you don't need to file a schedule. It's not required. And in some cases, there are a limited number of companies, like 48, I think, of them, in particular for the Form 2A and the Form 6, where they only have to file a couple of schedules because they got exemptions or waivers from the Commission. In those cases, there was a problem for the quarterly filings because they had all the other schedules, and there was expectations that they fill them out, and they were getting validation rule errors because they weren't filling some stuff out. So that issue has been addressed. But if you want to know how to do that, there's some things added to the taxonomy called the schedule waiver and the schedule exemption element. And you need to put a value on for those. You need to add values for the particular schedule for these. It's done in this. It's in the taxonomy. It's in the same part as where the remarks are added. and anything you put in there will appear in the remark schedule for these elements. Once you do that, that will basically turn off the validation rules for that schedule, and it'll turn off the rendering of that schedule. So it won't render, and the validation rules won't run. If you think that's a good way not to get any validation errors, just to do that, the FERC's going to be looking at anyone's filled these out just to make sure that they are valid. So just don't do it to get around validation errors. But that's available at the moment in the Form 2 and the Form 6.
Yeah, well, there was a question or a comment, I think, related to this that we might want to take now.
Yeah, sure.
The waiver and the exemption and the remark are all getting concatenated without any delimiter or new line. And they were asking, can this be updated in the next release?
Yeah, yes, that can. However, you should only enter one of those three. You shouldn't be entering all three of them. You should either put if it's a waiver, you should just put it in the waiver. If it's an exemption, you should just put in an exemption. You shouldn't be having a waiver and an exemption and a remarks and an exemption. You really only should be filling out one of those fields, not all three of them. So maybe that's just coming up as part of your testing, but it's not expected that you would be filling out all three values for these. So they shouldn't really be, you shouldn't, if you've got a situation where they're getting concatenated together, it's because you're kind of filling out extra data than you really need to. But yeah, that's it. I know that was a comment, but if we want to do that, we can certainly update that in the renderer. So if you choose to do that, it'll be put a return on them.
Great, thank you. Do you want me to move to the next slide?
Yes, please. Okay, so there have been questions asked. Sometimes what was originally on the paper instructions and on the taxonomy instructions can be slightly different. And we'll just talk about this for a minute. So in some cases, on some schedules, additional columns were added, and this really reflected, this is just really historical, really. In many cases, the FERC method for collecting data using VisualFox Pro didn't really allow them to change anything. There wasn't really much flexibility. It was very rigid in terms of getting changes made to the forms. So to get around that, in a number of cases, a lot of data was, if extra data was required, it all kind of got overloaded into single fields. And so when the taxonomy was designed, some of the stuff was split. So you will see in some cases, the row numbers may not line up exactly with the column numbers may not line up with what they were in the past because additional columns have been added. So you should really follow the instructions that are in the taxonomy for this. Other examples may include things like, we'll talk about these in a minute, is like the asterisk, enter an asterisk or two asterisks, for example, to indicate things. And so those have been split into multiple fields. So they may just, that's for the reasons, but there may be differences. Go to the next line. Sorry, the next slide. And this is the case where we've got, in this case, like you've got an asterisk. In the form, you should really be filling there's a Boolean value. So you can only fill those out as true or false. I know on some schedules, when they render them, they render them as an asterisk. I don't think that was updated for all of them. I think on some of them, they say true or false. So if you see that situation, that's fine. If it says put an asterisk in and it's got a value of true, that's totally okay. So don't worry about that. Okay, I think we can go to CPE questions. Michelle?
Great, thanks, Campbell. Okay, so we do have 2 CPE questions that we're going to take right now. And so again, for those of you who have asked to receive CPE or want to get it, please make sure that you respond to these questions. So let's take the first question. The due date for FERC annual Form 6 in XBRL format is it April 18th, 2022, May 1st, 2022, or June 1st, 2022? Okay, we'll take about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, just like another 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to be closing down the poll, and I think the answer to this is April 18th, 2022. And if you recall, that's the one where I had a typo. So I will always remember that date now. Let's go on to our next poll question. The due date for FERC Annual Form 714 in XBRL format is which of the following? Is it April 18th, 2022, May 1st, 2022, or June 1st, 2022? All right, we'll take another 30 seconds or so here. And it looks like most people are getting the right answer here. Okay, just like another 10 seconds. All right. Okay, so the correct answer to this is June 1st, 2022. So I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to turn it back over to Campbell. Move to the next slide here.
Okay, so this is just to give you an update on some of the things that we have on our website to help if you need them. Now, many filing, if you're using a filing agent, you shouldn't probably need to use any of these. They're going to incorporate these into the tools themselves. But this may be useful for people who aren't filers, or if you, for some reason, want to have someone else's filing or you want to check it, you can do that on our site. So we have some tools and instructions that are available there, so you can basically help you fill out the forms. You can run some of these. If you want to run the checks locally, we just basically give you instructions on how to do that. Or do the rendering locally and show you which code you need to download it. And then also, ability to access some of this data. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. And any of the resources that come available and making those available on our site. Go to the next slide, Michelle. Please. So if you want to render the filing, if you want to see what it looks like, we're making this renderer available on our site just for, for convenience. Now, obviously, if you're going to file with FERC, you can do a test filing. So if you want to see, you've got a number of options to render this. Obviously, most of the software vendors are supporting this. So if your software vendor is if you're using a software vendor, they'll be able to render the filing anyway. This is available though if you need it as a resource, and we allow you to render any of the forms, but you can also render a single schedule. So if you just want to look at a single schedule and make sure it's rendering properly, and if you're a software vendor, you want to make sure that you've got the right version, then you can come here and then you can run this. So this just gives you a way to be able to do it. It's let you render the entire filing or any schedule in any filing. Go to the next slide, please. And then we also, you can upload your file and you can validate your file and make sure that it's XBRL valid and that it passes all the FERC validation rules. So we've incorporated them into this website as well. So this is another tool that's available to filers if they choose to use that. So the next slide. One of the things is that we've also made available, just so you're aware of this, a lot of the data all of the data that's being filed with FERC, we're databasing that as well. So we have it in our database, and we have a number of tools that we make available so that you can pull that data down. So you can either use like an Excel or Google Sheets, or you can just use direct API calls, and then you can pull that data back, and then you can use it. So we make that available for limited amounts of data, and that's just really, for like, I think you can pull 100 lines at a time or something, and then that's just available for free, so people can at least start using this data, and people can, that's really for individual users, so they can start using it. But if you wanted to do vast data analysis, then we start incurring fees from just IT costs for that. So we do have a chargeback for that. But that is available if you want to get that data really in its raw form. Now, there are a number of software vendors as well who are supporting the FERC initiative, and they're making this data available too. So if you want to start doing complicated data analytics or stuff like that, there's a number of tools available in the marketplace too. So these are all options if you want to start using this FERC data. The only thing I'd say on this, just generally, if you are a user of FERC data, the quality of the data from what I'm seeing seems to be much better than what it was, and the ability to get it out of the traditional format of the VisualFox Pro was kind of very, very difficult for people to access. So this should make it significantly easier for folks to get, and it should be significantly more timely as well. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But if you're looking for more timely data, then this data should be, you really want to look at getting access to this FERC data through a number of different means. The last way you can get this data is FERC has also made their external API available, so you can download the data directly from FERC through their API, or you can download the filings themselves through eLibrary. And they also have a filing API, which basically gives you a list of all the filings that have been made on a given, have been made to FERC, so you can read that and you can pull that data down as well. Okay, so we have the next slide. So we'll just talk a little bit about the FERC API. So the FERC has made their data API available. And this can be accessed with just a general filer ID and login. And so there's a couple of links here, ecollection.ferc.gov API. And then you've got to get a token basically to do that. That means you've got to provide a username and password, and it gives you kind of a key that you can use. You've got to pass on every request you use. And that uses the XBRL US API format that we've published. But Michelle, I'm just going to share my screen and I'll just show folks what that is quickly. So on this is just an API call using it. And so basically this follows a format. This is the string that I mentioned before, which is eCollection ferc.api. And this is doing a fact search. And this is basically giving me back number of barrels delivered out and number of barrels received. And it gives back this information. So this is just going against the FERC state. I did this a while ago, so my connection may have fallen apart. Let's just see. So this is the data. It's pulled that data. It's gone out. It's requested the data and it's pulled it back. And you can see this is the value. This is number of barrels, whatever it is. And this was the CID that reported it. And it was crude. It was crude oil that was reported. So, and this is basically, you can see this has gone and got every fact. So this is a kind of a large file. So this is pulling back all the values that have ever been reported for this by every company to FERC. So you can kind of do these. It's pretty responsive, so you can get all this data. You can get all this data back. And this is just pulling the data from the historical filings, plus any filings that have been submitted in real time. So this API allows you to pull all this data back. Now, this is kind of programmy in the sense that, or technical, and it's just returning what this is called a JSON file. So if you wanted to use this, you can, the number of analytical tools you can use to make sense of this, or you maybe want to get your IT group involved, or you may want to go to a third party who's using this API who can format it for you. So that's this, but this API allows you to do lots of other queries against it. And all the possible queries you can use are documented. I'm going to stop sharing. Actually, I'll go to the link. So we have on our website that basically if you go to this link, and this is in the slide, so you can be able to go to this, but this is basically showing all the types of queries you can do. And this is what the FERC basically implemented. So you can search on fact data, report data, entity data, get information about entities. You can get information about concepts, about labels, about networks and relationships, and what documents were filed. So that's being supported by the FERC. So it just gives you a more technical way to be able to access this data. So you can get it. We also download all this data. We put it in our database, and it supports this API. So you can either go to FERC directly, or you can use the same API calls against our data. And we have an Excel add-in, so maybe it's a little bit easier for you to access. So you can look at using that as well. Okay.
Yeah, well, while you're pulling that up, one question that we got was, what is the difference between the FERC API and the XBRL US API?
The APIs are identical, pretty much. There are a couple of extra things that we have in our API, and that's just a timing difference, which the FERC will probably implement. One of the issues was particularly that had been raised was, I want to get all the data that is on a particular schedule. So our API will support pulling that back, but the FERC one currently won't. So we're trying to convince them that they should probably add that in there as well. So that's one difference. The other difference is that the FERC API will be probably a little bit faster at getting the data. So there's just going to be a time delay between them. So the FERC will basically receive the filing, it will get loaded into the database almost immediately, and the API will make it available straight away. Whereas our API will, we read the RSS feed, and then we load the data based on it being filed with the FERC. So there may be ours maybe 3 or 4 minutes behind that. So there is a slight timing issue. There is information in is there any additional information? No, the information is basically the same between the two of them in terms of what you can get back, other than finding everything that's on a schedule. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, Michelle, and we can go back to the slides.
Sure. 1 second. Okay, I'll flip to the next slide here.
Okay, actually, before I do that, because there was one data question, is the RSS feed from FERC available to everyone? Yes, it is. So that's on the FERC website, and you can get that RSS feed, and that's basically just listing all the filings that have been made with FERC through their portal. Now, we've asked them to make some changes to this. We'll see if they make them or not. At the moment, it's kind of monolithic. Every filing it's not being purged. That's going to become a problem over time, because if you just want to go and check the RSS feed, you don't want to download a monstrous file every time. So hopefully we can get that. We can get them to update that so that it's basically similar to what the SEC does, and maybe only reflects the last 200 filings that were made. So that's one request we have in of them. So, but that RSS feed, you can go to if you go to the FERC website, it's got a link to it, and then you can bring that up, and that gives you a listing of every filing. That is only live filings that have been made to the FERC. Doesn't include test filings, although some of them have the word test in them. So I would recommend to people, if you're doing a test filing, remember to click the test button, because some people haven't. I hope that's not an issue going forward anymore, but just to be conscious of that. One of the other things while we're talking about this that the FERC was talking about was the naming convention for the files. They're going to be doing an update to their filer manual to basically make a naming convention for their files that are actually submitted. At the moment, there really is no convention. So they're going to be doing that just to make sure you're aware of that is coming. If you have more questions on that, let me know, because I don't think they've finalized what that format will be, but I think it's going to be similar to what the SEC does. So it'll be like something like the CID and then the filing date and then the file name, rather than the ticker, which is what the SEC use. They'd probably use the CID and then the filing, the date for the filing, like 2020, 2022, 12/31 type affair. At the moment, a lot of the filing names are the same. It's not necessarily a problem for the FERC, but when people start downloading the files and they all have the same file name, that can make things a little bit more complicated for people. Okay, REL updates. So REL is the software that FERC is using, and there's distributions of that, and I know a lot of people are using this, but there were some updates that were made. Thanks to the folks from Wakiva, they sent us through some proposed changes. So we've got those updated, which should make the rendering significantly faster on large filings. Basically, what was happening was there was a lot of reloading of the filings that was happening when these files were being rendered. So this should improve, hopefully, the performance by 40%. So if you've got on large filings in particular, if you've got if you look at the FERC renderer site, which is on the GitHub, there's an updated version of of Zool, which basically should improve the rendering performance. So if you're a filing agent and you're helping filers, or just generally if you've decided to use RL, just want to make sure that you're aware of that. So then if you want to use it, then that's available. If you're looking at the stuff in detail and you do see anything that you think could be improved, please let us know, because we want to get feedback. Anything we can make the whole process more pleasant for everyone, then please, that would be really, really helpful. And then the other thing just to be aware of, the FERC did an update to the rendering and validation rules on Friday, so that's included in the FERC renderer repo at the moment. So that is there. And so obviously if they make these changes tonight, then we'll hopefully get this updated tomorrow as well for any other changes that they have. Is there any questions anyone has on some of these changes that were made to RL? There were a couple of other changes that were made, and they're available on the GitHub site. You can see those if you want to have a look at them. But the main headline news there is that if the rendering, if you want to get the rendering speed, the rendering of some of these files sped up, you probably want to get this latest version of RL. Okay.
Any questions on that? At least not right now. Let's try and move to the next slide.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, we're on CPE questions. Okay, so we're going to switch gears here and go through a couple of additional CPE questions. So let me go to my next whole question. All right, and you should be able to see this question now. Which of the following is not a valid reason that a filing may not render correctly? If you recall Campbell talking about this a little bit, that there are situations where a filing may not render. Certain filings cannot be rendered. Is that the correct answer? Or the data is entered incorrectly, or data is missing from a schedule? Which of these is not a correct, not a valid reason that a filing may not render correctly? Okay, we'll take about another 10 seconds here. Okay, I'm going to close down the poll. The correct answer is certain filings cannot be rendered. Filings can be rendered, but there can be situations where a filing doesn't render correctly because the data is entered incorrectly or data is missing from a schedule. So answer number one was the correct answer. Okay, so let me move to the last poll question here. Okay, some paper instructions indicate that an asterisk should be used to indicate a Boolean value. In this situation, filers should report the value as an asterisk, report the value as true or false, or report the value as yes or no. Which is the correct response? Okay, we've got another 30 seconds. Okay, and we're going to shut down this poll, and the correct answer was report the value as true or false. And I think most people got the answer right. So thank you very much. And again, as I said earlier in the session, if you are getting CPE, please be sure to, well, you have responded, and you'll be hearing from David Torriello, who's going to provide their CPE certificates later on. So I want to thank Campbell Pride very much for his presentation today. And please don't leave yet. We do have some upcoming events that I wanted to mention. These are not specific to FERC filers. These are actually for filers to the SEC. But there's some pretty significant new XBRL requirements coming up for investment managers. And so we are putting together a 2-part webinar series starting in May, where we're going to bring in some providers who have many, many years of experience working with investment managers. And we're going to be going through issues like, how do you change your current workflow? How do you work with the samples and tools and resources that the SEC has made available for you? Where do you even start with, looking at some of the existing documents and what numbers actually need to be tagged? Because there is a fair amount of complexity in the new investment management final ruling for closed-end funds. And so we're trying to get some answers from the SEC on some of this, on some of the specifics, and we're going to be kind of digging deep into, what investment management companies will need to do as they begin complying with these rules. So join us May 24th and June 7th. And these are the links to the actual webinar, so you can sign up right away, and we'll be sending this out as we do with everything. So with that, I want to thank you very much. Campbell, any final remarks on the FERC taxonomy and what's going on with the FERC?
Yeah, I know a lot of people on this call who put a lot of comments into Yeti. That has been extremely useful. So if you do see anything, I can only highly encourage you to do that. And the FERC has been very good at trying to get these issues turned around as soon as possible. Getting testing a lot of these forms, because the variety in them has been somewhat challenging. So this feedback has been totally invaluable. So I would imagine that going forward for the quarterly filings and the annual filings will be significantly simpler and easier. We shouldn't have, a lot of these issues should be resolved. So I just want to thank, there's been a number of individuals who have put a lot of comments and a lot of time into responding, and that's been extremely valuable. So I'd like to thank those folks.
Great. So Campbell, thanks for your talk today, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Actually, we have one last question here. I just wanted to run this by you. What is Yeti, and where do I find it? That's a good question. Yeti a number of times.
All right, so let me just quickly show that, because if you are a filer and you don't know about this is extremely useful. You should. So if you want to stop, and I'll just show this. And this is free to use. You can use this at any time. All right, so the FERC has put this is basically a website up. It's at xbrlview.ferc.gov, and it allows you to look at any particular form. So you can see here the Form 1, this is the first slide we put up. So I'm not sure that's the question, but if you're doing a Form 1, you can look at the Form 1, the Form 1F, the Form 1.3Q, this is the quarterly filing form, and there's a Form 1 all. This basically combines everything. But if we look at the Form 1, for example, this basically shows you the what the taxonomy is, all the schedules, and it basically will tell you all the information that is in the schedule. So like in general information, I'll open these up. It can tell you information, basically what the data that can be reported, state of incorporation, what it is. It's on the Form 1F, it's on the Form 1, what information about that, what values you can put in for that field, these enumeration values. So that's Yeti. It basically gives you a full listing of every element that's in the taxonomy by schedule. And then you can see, well, what are all the schedules required for Form 1? So it gives you a list of all of these, and you can drill down. If you want to see the instructions are in basically it tells you what the instructions for the form are. So it's basically like a codified version of the the form itself and everything that comprises the form. And so Yeti basically has all that information in there. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but if you're familiar with the forms, then Yeti basically tells you everything that possibly can be in them. And then when I say put comments into Yeti, people can put comments, and you can see the comments that people have put in. So if there's an issue, and what FERC's doing about it is here. So there's kind of complete transparency into the process. So Shree's put in.
Well, I'm not sure if everyone is able to view the comments. I actually tried it myself and wasn't able to view. So that
okay. You've got to
view.
Yeah, you have to request a login from the FERC, and they will give that to you, and then you can see them. provide them. So basically it's a way to, but that's available to everyone. Anyone can enter comments and can view the comments that others are made. So it's just really a way to be able to collect all this feedback, and then you can see how the feedback's being resolved as well. If you put a comment in, like if an issue was closed, and they usually put commentary on why it was closed and implemented. So you can see how those comments are being resolved. So this is extremely.
Do you want to demonstrate how you can submit a comment by clicking on?
Sure. So let's say we've got here, and there's a typo in the label or something. You can put on this plus sign. Then you can put you put a subject in. You can add a comment, and you can add the comment onto it. I'm not going to add one here, but so it allows you pretty much to easily add the comment, and then it'll come up as a comment. And it'll be associated with this. And so then this will go onto a queue at FERC, and they look at all the new comments that have come in, advertise them, and then they will address them.
And you can access Yeti on just going to FERC.gov. You could also access it on the XBRL US website. If you look under taxonomies, it's considered a taxonomy viewing tool.
And someone to put the comment, be sure to view the latest taxonomy. That is correct. Make sure you do look at the latest one. And you can see here, this was the first one they published, and this was a draft, and this is the latest one. So if you want to see what's the latest taxonomy, you'll see here, Form 2022, whatever. So they're all here. Form 714, this has only got one because it's only an annual filing. And you can go and see that. It also has information in here. It also has all the reference details. So it also tells you, information about these. So you can see, you can get the details, right? So name of officer of custody, the reference information is here. So this tells you basically got to report this value in the current period. And that's all there is to it. But it then also tells you what dimensions you should be putting on facts if that's applicable, etc. Like control over respondent. Well, that's the note, but I'm just going down here. So anything like this with the red dots in it, that means it's a dimension. That means it's going to be multiple rows. So you've got to keep, you can report name of company controlled. You can report multiple of them. And then, so I mentioned dimensions earlier. It says basically it uses this dimension. So it's basically repeating. You can have as many corporations controlled by respondent. So if you've got 50, you can create 50 rows. And then those rows will basically be rendered on a form. And that just tells you information about it, what the element means, and what forms it's reported in. In this case, only in the form 1, what schedule it's in, etc. So that's Yeti. Yeah, and it's actually a really useful tool to see, to see what's required to be filed. And effectively, all the forms, the blank forms, the rendered forms are generated from the taxonomy, which Yeti represents. And all the validation rules are based off that as well.
Yeah, well, one other thing that you had mentioned during the session that people may need a little bit more information on is AREL. AREL is an open source XBRL processor, and you can find it at arelle.org, ARELLE.org. So for those of you who want to take a closer look at that, that's the place to go, just in terms of stuff that's been mentioned during the call today. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that we have. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and hopefully this is really helpful for you all. And Campbell, thanks again for the talk. And please join us in May and June for the investment management sessions, and we'll have more FERC sessions as well, of course, coming up as the rollout continues. Thank you very much.